Good afternoon, everyone. It's so exciting to see a really quite impressive turnout for the last session on a Friday afternoon. So appreciate your attendance and your enthusiasm for this important topic, security, cloud, and innovation. My name is Mark Ryland. I'm the Chief Solutions Architect for Amazon Web Services for the Worldwide Public Sector team. And very happy to be hosting this panel and hopefully seating some questions, but we'll probably have questions from the audience as well and get your input. And hopefully we'll have a really great session. And then I hope you stay for the reception afterwards. So let me introduce our panelists. I'll go, I guess, left to right here. Start with Manzi Mirza, who's the Chief Security Evangelist for Splunk. Manzi has 15 years of tactical and cybersecurity research experience in government and commercial organizations. His experience has included vulnerability management, security product testing, penetration testing, adversary modeling, cyber tools, infrastructure development. He's also served as a content developer and instructor for cyber training and for Red Blue team exercises. Manzi's been an invited speaker at a number of government conferences and other conferences, and his current research is focused on integrated approaches to both human-driven and automated responses to cyber attacks. So welcome, Manzi. Great to have you.
Let me hear it.
Some enthusiasm on a Friday afternoon.
Thank you.
Next, we have Kent Bridges. Kent is the Chief Security Officer for Incentive Technology Group, or ITG. He's been leading their Center of Excellence and is a thought leader and trusted advisor to the federal government on federal security issues, as well as, in particular, and why it's so great to have him on the panel, a number of Amazon Web Services deployments. He's led innovative and cost-effective security solutions for nearly 300 government systems and has led the security architecture and engineering practices for multiple AWS FedRAMP compliance systems, incorporating traditional best practices with leading-edge security tools, capabilities, and methodologies. So welcome to Kent. Nice. And last but definitely not least, we have Greg Wan from Trend Micro. He's the director of the U.S. federal business for Trend Micro and a global leader, the company, a global leader in IT security, and Greg's a global leader in IT security too. He graduated from West Point with an engineering degree and has an MBA from UC Irvine. I grew up in San Diego, so kind of home territory for me as well. Started his career in the Armored Cavalry Division before going onto Cavalry Division, going into technology industry where he worked in military business development and focused on interoperability. He's held a number of senior management positions at Trend Micro and other organizations in support operations and sales. But just in the last few years has been drawn back into government roles, so we're glad to have you back in public sector.
Thank you.
Welcome. So before I get to my questions, I thought maybe we give the panelists a chance to, I've done the kind of official introductions, maybe you could each say a few words about what's going on within your world in terms of innovation, security, and cloud. Manzi?
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on the panel. Thank you, everybody, for being here this afternoon. My main function at Splunk is sort of three-part, where I spend a lot of time talking to customers, doing research work, and then driving what's happening within the product. And so when I go out and talk to customers and see what they're looking for, the conversation is changing a little bit. It used to be, with respect to cloud in particular, it used to be people would say, well, it's a cloud. Do I really want to be there? It's kind of, I'm not quite sure. To now they're starting to look at approaches and saying, actually it's more effective for me to be in the cloud. And I can achieve my security objectives more as I'm in the cloud versus if I was to do this on-prem. Or they're starting to realize not just the efficiencies, but the effectiveness with which they can conduct operations in the cloud, not just from an IT or from a service delivery perspective, but then from a security perspective as well. And I think we'll talk a little bit about more detail about what some of the things that are driving those, but at a high level, I think one of the big challenges that organizations are facing is around human resources and how to manage and allocate responsibilities for security operations. And they're starting to realize that the cloud infrastructure, Amazon in particular, offers them capabilities to be able to do that better and do that faster so they can allocate human resources in a better way. And then what we do at Splunk then as a result is, because we're an Amazon partner and we're a big data platform, we're able to take all this information from CloudTrail or CloudWatch or Cloud Config and any number of services and then allow the the customers to take advantage of that. We have a number of customers that are now running in AWS and conducting their security operations, even for their on-prem systems. They're securing those systems and running security operations in the cloud for those systems. So there's been a big shift over the last few years.
That's great. Kent, a few opening words?
Yeah, so really where we focus and where really, off of that, what we really focused a lot on is helping the government understand that framework and understand, how FISMA works. I think it's there. I think FISMA is there. The framework is there. The agencies as a whole have had their own interpretations of that over time, which is good. I think there's a lot of innovation. We're talking about innovation that has taken place. There's been some goods, but I think in the same way, back to the resources and understanding, what level of resources, really what is the level that we need to be at. And I think now that we're coming to a cloud-based environment where we have, methodologies that can be put in place, frameworks such as FedRAMP that could be put in place, that's allowing kind of that unified, that understanding, that baseline of where we need to be. And now tagging that up with cloud environments such as Amazon, where we can understand the shared responsibility matrix, how that can be used, how that can be leveraged. So internally before, where we had different departments that were working together, now that can become a more foundational, vetted by multiple agencies, by multiple vendors, by multiple accreditors across the board. So it's really helping and striving to work with those agencies to understand how best to accomplish that.
Right. That's great. Appreciate it. A few words from Greg as well. Start off.
Well, I would say, one of the things that you see is, I call it simple. I had the pleasure of hearing Mark speak the other night. I was joking with him because he was taking a very complex topic, and that's exactly what we were talking about with cloud. You make it simple for the people up front. So if you think a dozen years ago, when the blades first started coming out, you went from a very expensive platform to a very inexpensive platform. You saw this proliferation of that going across the system. Then you saw virtualization, where it basically took the blades out of the picture and they went to different scenarios. And then you saw the proliferation of this equipment and the decentralized data centers. But then the security started to get complex as you were looking at what was happening within all this and the configuration settings and the days of, as the operating systems were getting more complex to set up. And then you started to see security get more complex. So we used to talk in our terms, in the security world, we talk about time to protect. How quickly do you get it back to a non-vulnerable state? But Amazon takes a lot of that away. So now you become a little bit more proficient because the underlying architecture makes it much more secure. So when people ask the questions, is it more secure? Yeah. But as a result of that, people are actually also more conscious of it. So for example, in a sales cycle, you hear it come up very quickly in the discussion. Am I more secure here versus not? So I think in the terms of the cloud, what it is, it's all about how easy you make it. Don't negate the need to understand it, but you don't have to worry about it quite as much.
Yep, that's good. So Kate, you said something about FedRAMP, FISMA, and so I want to jump to that topic. In the past, I think when we talked about compliance and security, we often almost thought they were pretty different in many ways, right? Compliance was kind of this paper-based exercise you did once a year, and this long series of checks that you had to check off. And I think people that were deep into the security were almost a little bit cynical about compliance. It's like, well, it's just so far removed from the daily threats, the daily operations, and so forth. What do you think? Has cloud had an impact on that? Are the two are they further apart because compliance is still slow and security has to be faster, or are they actually coming together, would you say, more in terms of the kind of cloud models?
Well, that's a very good point. I really think they're coming together. I think it's been a driving change. Really, the cloud environment and all of this has really caused us to take a step back and really look at the technology, look at what we're doing, coming back to the innovation topic. How can we take a step back, take our lessons learned for the last decade, and really now apply that? We have a new step, a major milestone that we're hitting, and how can we drive that change? Yeah. And I think that's key.
Any other comments on that compliance and security topic? Or?
Well, I think, and Monzi might want to comment on the backside of this about what I'm saying, but it's a view, right? Now compliance used to be somebody who sat in a room would come in and try to make you check your boxes. But nowadays, when you're talking about the cloud, you make it a lot easier because a lot of those boxes you can actually pre-check. But then you get the complexity of the fact that you now have people that don't have to worry about it as much from, for example, configuration, and now need to understand it at the application level, which means it's a visibility thing. And that also, but that doesn't negate the ability to understand it. but then you have to find it quickly. And I think that's where really something like a tool where you can aggregate that and see that in a picture view to see I have a problem here quickly.
Right.
Yeah, I think the convergence point and also the visibility points are key. Part of it is the spirit of policy and compliance requirements is essentially to help ensure information assurance, right? That's the spirit of that. And I think historically what's happened is because of the technical difficulties and challenges of being able to implement technical controls for those well-meaning policy decisions has been very challenging. And so you would have to manage these very sophisticated stacks and of tools, both on the security side and also on the IT infrastructure side. So when we talk about innovation, I think one of the big things that's happening now is because of what you can do in the cloud with respect to being able to get the visibility, who has access to what, how many machines are spinning up, and how are they being utilized, or for how long have they been operational. All of those types of questions have now been answered, but just out of the box, as both of you guys have mentioned. But I think so. What that creates now is an opportunity to really get deeper and get closer to what, from a frontline defender's perspective, we've always been worried about. We've been worried about breaches. We've been worried about speed of incident investigation. We've been worried about vulnerability management and how do we mitigate and ensure business operations, right? And so now we have this opportunity to where the compliance and all of the auditing requirements are now getting built in to what the platform is. And so now you essentially raise the bar. So just like before, we no longer worry about finding a telephone booth to make a call. We just have one in our pocket so we can actually get to do what we really wanted to do on the phone, which is have a conversation, right? Yeah. Or be able to communicate. So I think that's what's happening from a convergence perspective, from policy and the actual security. And I think this is also, on the innovation side, I think this is also a big opportunity to innovate on the policy side. Because now you can actually start to craft policy that is very, very realistic and that is threat-focused and adversary-focused, rather than focused on organizations and audit interactions.
Yeah, right. Those are great points. I think just to continue on this theme, because I think it's a really important one. Last year I gave a talk on security and compliance, and a woman came up to me afterwards. She says, I'm an information assurance professional, and you were talking about this and that, and CloudFormation and orchestration. And she said, why couldn't I just do like a security audit on a CloudFormation template? And I said, that's right, you could. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but she was right. In other words, if you're able to declare the state of a system, then that declared state becomes a kind of documentation of a desired outcome. And if you can measure either drift from this or get the system back to that desired state, now you've really brought a very tight integration between the policy, the plan that you have, and the rules that you have, and actual operations. They're brought together in a sense by the automation capabilities. Does that ring a bell with you guys, or are you seeing that kind of trend in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that you see is not only policy from a sense of roles-based, but also policies as a sense of systems. Yeah. And the fact of the matter that when you look at the cloud, the ease of the implementation of that policy gives you much more flexibility to be able to scale to that very quickly. So you think of it from this perspective. If I have the ability to create a policy that in the traditional old, let's say, brick and mortar days, I used to have to replicate that policy manually across systems a lot of times. Well, now in the cloud, you don't have to do that. You can spin this up, it follows the same policies. Then you apply those same security policies, so as they're spinning up, they're applying across those platforms the same. You have that guaranteed compliance across it the way you view it. I always say as leaders, our thing is about buying time, and to go back to the points that were made earlier, if we buy time because we're not messing around with policies anymore, now we have more time to investigate. We have more time to go look at the incident response. We have more time to go figure out, is this right for my organization? Or even better, to go play with the application, which is what the initial goal is.
Right. That's great.
Yeah, I think if I can add a little bit of point on that, you made a really nice point about just the behavior, right? So you said operations, but with my psychology background, I'd say there's intent, and then there's the behavior that is reflected as a result of that intent, right? Yeah. And so if you as an auditor were to walk in today into an organization and say, well, what is your perimeter defense policy? They might give you a laundry list of paperwork to say, this is the perimeter defense policy. But the alternative to evaluate that policy is to say, well, let me see your firewall logs, or let me see your firewall configs. Show me the ACL. Show me what those things look like, right? And that is the behavioral expression of what your policy is. And so the policy could say one thing, but that is not as important as what's actually happening on the ground, right? And I think to your point, Greg, in cloud environments now, the disjunction between what the intent is and what the expression of that and the behavioral expression, operational expression of what that is very tightly knit together now. They're no longer two separate systems. They're defined and then they're expressed and operationalized. And I think that is probably, in terms of innovation, I think that's probably one of the most interesting innovations there. So now we have the opportunity to pivot, as you mentioned, right? So that you can create a new policy or modify what you want to do as a business and operationalize it very, very quickly across your entire deployment.
This reminds me a lot of a talk. I highly recommend people interested in what's going on in federal IT and public sector IT and these type of topics. Go Google a talk that Mark Schwartz, who was in our keynote yesterday, he gave a talk at a DevOps conference, and it was really compelling. He talked about how it seems counterintuitive that in using a technique of DevOps, agile development, continuous integration, continuous delivery, that seems totally counterintuitive to the model that says, hey, security and availability is all about locking things down and making sure that changes don't occur until they've been vetted by a dozen teams, et cetera, et cetera. He says, now we're updating our systems 4 or 5 times a day. Yeah. But he said, actually, he claims it brings about is a greater integration through that pipeline, that delivery pipeline. Your security team, your compliance team, everybody's involved in those frequent updates, and they can update their security posture frequently as well as add application features. So he makes a really good case for actually much improved security capability using these agile methodologies. I'd just like you guys to comment on it. Do you think that there's truth in that?
No, I mean, I'll chime in. I definitely think there is. I mean, it kind of goes back and it ties to what you were saying, that gap between true compliance or true security and where you're at. And when you're leaning more towards the side of compliance, we need to make compliance. You're on that agency or that system that's driven for compliance. We really need to meet those goals. Oftentimes, historically, we've overlooked actual security because we're trying to meet these compliance measures. Well, what happens is you're auditing a lot of manual processes. There's a lot of gap there, potential air gaps between this being implemented or implemented correctly. So the more that you're implementing code, implementing repeatable processes, DevOps models, the more, back to that audit concept, my auditor can focus specifically on what is actually taking place and I know is going to continue to take place. Right. So now you have, again, you're offloading that human off to looking at more the technical details and looking at security while covering the compliance measure.
Yeah.
I think one of the other pieces of that is if you think about it from an adversary's perspective, and we look at the cost model, and we look at historically, what we have done is essentially the idea of, someone stands in the back of the room and some security technology vendor hands this person a bulletproof vest. And they take 2 steps, and the first person hits them and knocks them down. And then the next security vendor comes along and gives them another vest and says, well, with this vest, you can get 2 rows past, right? The problem is that the cost and the burden of better cyber defense has historically been on the defender. It's been on the victim and not on the adversary. We have done very little to switch that model. That's why you hear terms like cyber war is asymmetric, or anyone can launch an attack, et cetera, et cetera. When we go to so what is the key contributor that makes it easier for the adversaries? Dedicated adversaries, yes, they are opportunistic, but they also study their targets for long periods of time. So the more stable an environment and the less an environment changes, the bigger the opportunity for the adversary to study, to target, to understand, to persist, and to leverage that environment. We have now, by going to the cloud and adopting a DevOps model, you're essentially flipping the cost model. Because from the defender's perspective now, the defender understands based on the audit controls and the code changes and access policies to see who's doing what at what time. So the defender has deep visibility, whereas the adversary is left guessing as to the current state of a system. And so when you have that, you're actually impacting the cost on the adversary side. And now that's real defense. And as a defender, I mean, that's great news, right? Because now it costs more. The next attack is going to cost my adversary more than the last one did. So that's good. And it reduces my cost, as you mentioned, Greg, as we distribute across those same policies and evolve faster and better, is my cost is reduced over time as I improve where the adversary cost increases. That's a great model. I love it.
And it's exactly the same kind of metrics and insight that you need in an agile, quickly developing system those exact same kind of metrics and those exact same kind of measures about system performance, about amount of memory usage, about data in and out of an environment, all those same kinds of things are exactly instrumentation of things like threats that have been, successful penetration, right? And so the whole idea of like an advanced persistent threat, persistence means that systems haven't changed in a long time, and this threat's been sitting there doing bad stuff because your Exchange server hasn't been updated for the last 12 months. So there's a really different, as you say, there's a really different dynamic to these highly dynamic environments, and it really does change I think the threat landscape and the ability to respond. So it's very exciting times. I think we should maybe take some questions from the audience. I've got a couple follow-ups, some humdingers for the end here, but maybe we'll, if anybody would like to put out some questions, and I'll repeat them for the mics. Anything for our panelists? I'll give you an Amazon gift card if you're the first. No.
There we go.
Oh, look at those hands shoot up. Yes, sir. They're in the middle there.
Containerization is a big push right now. Everybody wants to go right to it. And how do you see, with the development of the security for it, how is that coming along?
Containerization is a hot topic in the industry now. A lot of people pushing for it. Developers very excited about it. It really is kind of a cool developer tool. By the way, try to explain it to an executive in one of your organizations. I challenge you. I've been trying for a while, and it's not quite sinking in. But so it's hot. What impact does containerization have on security? Does it change anything any significant way, or is it kind of just one more ho-hum, lightweight virtualization kind of thing? Or what do you think? Do you notice much in the way of security impacts?
I think from a security technology standpoint, the real trick is actually the opposite question. Go find a vendor, right, who is innovative enough to stay in front of those type of trends, to be aligned with those type of trends. Because then it's less about is security modifying to the trend of, for example, containerization, or pick a topic.
Right.
It's more about how much are you staying in front of that, so by the time I'm in containerization, I've got the mechanisms in place to be able to protect against that, to provide the security measures. Then again, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I'm spending less time worrying about containerization as a security to get that level of remediation I need there, and more about what am I going to do with this containerization, because I have vendors or people out there that understand that. In fact, in a way, you can make the opposite argument, right? I don't have to understand that because I know they do.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and I think part of the simplification of all of that is really the core idea from a security perspective. Oftentimes, as we hear this language of you want to reduce the attack surface, or you want to reduce your exposure, right? And one of the things, just if we look at from a technical weeds perspective, with containerization, what you're essentially doing is you're reducing the attacker's footprint and the impact that happens when something is potentially damaged, right? So if you're running a particular application in a container, then you're running just that application. And so when something negative happens to the application, the permeability of that particular attack and the propagation of the attack can be better contained. And so I think it helps elevate the problem, the challenge for the attacker. It helps alleviate some challenges for the defender's perspectives. But at the same time, I think the key is still the same. It's an implementation, but it's still on the same thread of saying, simplify, add visibility, add more transparency, and raise the bar for the attacker, and make it easier for the defender to do their job and maintain policy and process, right? And I think those threads are consistent. So it's an added implementation tool that you have in your pocket now.
So when I think about containers, another thing that often they represent is a drive towards microservices, that you literally, every single element or component of your application now presents a network endpoint to the other components, and potentially it's a local, super fast call across address spaces. But the point is that the abstraction now is listening on a socket and serving up some kind of thing to another container, and breaking down apps more and more into these network endpoints that communicate with one another. And in some ways, I can see some real security benefits of that, because you're not, for example, in the shared memory space. You have fewer components in one address space, and so forth and so on. On the flip side, I'm going to make kind of two arguments, and I'll see how you guys react to this. Another thing that people really like about containerization is that you get rid of a lot of the dependency problems. Like, I'm using one version of Java, you're using a different version of Java. So-and-so has, he's 2 versions old in Ruby, but we can all develop common code and talk as a microservices, and they can all be deployed in the same virtual machine. because the container is providing an isolation boundary between, say, different libraries, for example. That to me sounds like, maybe there's some issues there because now I've got more heterogeneity in my software stacks. And maybe secure, everyone's not using the latest patch version because no one notices they've got their own special version or whatever. So I can see kind of pros and cons from that. Let me just throw those themes out and see what you guys were I think we're thinking this on the fly, so it's a great question because it's forcing the panel to be creative here. What do you think?
I would throw out there, because, really you look at, across the board, you see a lot of, like you're talking about Java, right? You're talking about, in shared databases, you're talking about different areas where you have a single flaw that has a single impact to one minor component, and yet, like you said, I'm talking to it again, but you're sharing that across. Everybody now, from a risk management perspective, that has just grown in magnitude significantly. So the ability just, to minimize that risk down to the smallest level, definitely.
So I go back to the technology side. Use your technology to your advantage. What if I turn around and say to you, I don't care about patching? Right? What if you could take a network level patch and be able to put it there that gives you the protection of vulnerability so that you can then mitigate those unpatched systems in a controlled fashion? What if you could buy time because you're not spending time just bouncing your servers or bouncing your services in an uncontrolled fashion, but you now have time to more proactively spend to, for example, test that?
Right.
And it all goes back to that, go back to the point you made earlier, which is the visibility. When I can see that, I got a problem there. Yeah. But I would also throw out it adds complexity because you need to have the greater visibility because today's threats, they're all over the place. Sometimes it's not isolated to one particular area or one particular protocol. They can be using 17, 18 different protocols. They can be talking from 3 different machines. They could be in a passive mode that's only going to kick active when a certain event happens. Yeah. So that visibility is also very important.
Right.
I think containerization, so when we can look at it a couple different ways in the sense that when you talk about, you have a vulnerable system or you have a vulnerable microservice that's running. If you imagine that same so everyone that I speak with, by and large, is running the older service, the unpatched service, because there is a business requirement, there is a business need, or there's some constraint that's driving that, right? I haven't met a single person who said, I love that vulnerable version of my favorite whatever, and so therefore, I think we should remain vulnerable because it's the right thing to do, right? And so I haven't met anybody who says that. So there are business constraints and requirements that drive that. The question then is, how do I manage my risk such that I can articulate what my risk is to an auditor, I can articulate what my improvement path is to my developers and to my IT infrastructure folks so that I can move to the next level and move forward, right? So I would argue that in that construct, containerization is very helpful because I can continue to use legacy code, which I don't have time for or whatever my constraint is. I can continue to use this legacy code for a little bit longer while recognizing that there is a problem here. Yep. So I think that's one bucket. I think the second bucket is around this notion of diversity within a particular environment. And the more diverse an environment is, the harder you make it for an attacker to compromise an environment at any significant level. Then the second component of that is when you reduce the attack surface, meaning that when you look at containers and you look at the communication pathways, there's only so many discrete ways in and out, usually one over one socket, over one kind of protocol or one sort of API, right? And so what you're doing is you're really defining the attack surface for yourself and for the attacker. And if you're adding visibility to that, now you know what's happening within that pathway. And so it's a very good mechanism for you to keep track of that. The other thing that allows you to do is in the case of an incident or a breach, you have this opportunity to selectively remove that particular system from your overall stack. And yeah, you might take a service hit, but the rest of the system continues to be operational because you're not running in a mixed environment, like as you mentioned. So they're not all running on the same machine, quote unquote, right? And so I think it's the issue of risk management. It's the ability to be able to decentralize and segregate, and it's the ability to reduce your attack surface by controlling based on specific protocols. And I mean, these are all things. You go back to the Rainbow series back in the early '80s, right? Even if you look at the Orange Book rules or guidances from the DARPA guys back in the day, right? It's all of those things that were so hard to implement. Least privilege control. I mean, this is a great example of that at a communication level. And so it's going to help accelerate that and allow people to manage what they're trying to do better and get more insight into it.
Yeah, those are all great points, and I think even the idea of a microservice where you express a capability as a network endpoint forces you to think about things like failure conditions. That if you're calling a local library, you just never really think, you don't ever think that the local library is going to time out or not respond or whatever. It might crash, but it's But as soon as you model other services or routines that you're calling as network endpoints, then you have to think about retry logic, you got to think about idempotency, you got to think about all the things you normally think about in networking, which actually builds more resilience, right? Because suddenly I got to take down that microservice. If you take out a library, the whole application crashes, right? If you take out a microservice, then everybody else should go, ooh, I lost a feature, but I don't stop working, right? Yeah. If you've modeled it properly. So I'm coming down on the side of thinking that actually this is really good from a security perspective. So it's a great question. Thank you for that.
Yeah, but what's it going to do to cost, right? Once you start containerizing everything and you lose the shareability, now the cloud goes up in cost, doesn't it?
So the question was, what about the cost drivers? If you lose the shareability, lots of people not sharing things, will it impact costs? Anybody want to take a crack at that one? I have opinions, but I'm the moderator, so I have to be quiet.
I'll take it, Ed, right? I think part of the cost argument is around implementation choices. And I haven't seen anything that says thou shalt containerize or thou shalt leave, right? And so I think businesses are going to have to make decisions based on that balance of being able to say containerization makes sense for certain things, and where it's useful, I think it's important to use it. In other areas where it's not important to use it, then it's good not to use it, right? And so it's the good news is, I think, that there is enough transparency, in particular with AWS. That's where most of my experiences is. Because of that transparency, you can see what your costs are. You can see what your billing requirements are. You can see what your rates are. You can see how to manage that or to throttle it up or down, however it is that you want to deal with it. And if you feel like there are specific things that are not there, well, then there's at least 2 people I know at Amazon that you can say, hey, fix that, right?
And I would say it's all a point of matter of how you want to set it. So think about it from a development perspective. You could develop a single system that's a brute force hog. Right? Yeah. You could throw as many core processors at it as you want to throw at it. You could develop systems that are very, very small. And the thing about the cloud, and to go back to sort of the thought here with an innovation side, is you can try it actually at a relatively low cost. Yeah. You could actually test these ideas. I was thinking, Mark, when you go back and you're talking about the microservices, we're talking about the days a service was a service, a server was a server, and now they're kind of synonymous. They start to get in that world. So you can set it up in different ways. You can say, is this more efficient and cost effective? Right. Is this more efficient than cost effective? Or this legacy system, I know is a hog, I want to try doing it over here. And I can do that in a week, try it. If I don't like it, throw it away. And what was it cost? I guarantee you probably a whole lot less than a blade server or even, let's say, a quad.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll venture a comment as well. It's a really interesting question. I guess there's two factors that spring to mind. One is developer productivity. One reason developers love containers is because they feel much more productive. So they're developing code on their laptops on planes. They're developing code, and they're not as needing to coordinate quite as much and kind of getting some stuff working. Presenting those well-defined software, network interfaces as, hey, this is my software contract. You call this endpoint with these parameters. I will respond the way that you expect. But meanwhile, I'm totally free to improve my implementation. So that's a cost savings, if it's true. I think it is, that you can get some developer efficiencies. And then the other arguable efficiency you can gain is that you now have the choice for packing containers onto virtual machines, right? You have a choice, like in our environment, for example, we're pretty strict about, the capability of a, M3 XL is pretty much hard-coded because we want people to have a common experience across the different instance types, right? Regardless of whether there's 2 or 3 customers using the same hardware or whatever, we're very conscious about strict resource allocation. So specifically, we don't over-provision, we don't over-commit. If you have 2 cores devoted to your thing, you get 2 cores, even if they're not busy. No other customer gets to use those 2 cores. If you're in a containerized environment, now you get to choose how much to over-commit, or I wouldn't say you'd ever need to under-commit, but certainly how much you want to over-commit. A given virtual machine is costing you a certain amount. If you want to pack 50 containers onto that thing and that works well for you, you can do that. If you can only do 8, fine. So I actually think you have more capability, more choice, maybe save some money, but it is more complicated, right? So complexity is a cost. It's a great question, and I'd love some further thought and discussion on that. It might be a wash, but I don't think it's more expensive. That would be my instinct, but. we can do some experiments and we'll get a development team and do, spend 3 weeks doing it both ways and see which one's cheaper. That's the beauty of infrastructure that you pay for by the drink. So, another question right there, sir.
So along the same line of thoughts on this containerization, like using Docker or microservices, do you see a possibility of foundational security service which can be captured within Docker or microservice or container, which is standardized? Seems like you could have shown identity access management,
Right.
perimeter control, security groups.
So for the microphone, do containers give us a new opportunity to do some standardized security services that are, a common service, common microarchitecture perhaps across all these different containers or people using containers? Is that could that be helpful to the model?
I'd say simply yes. I mean, think about it. If you, like anything, a communication thing, if you have a standard way that you're going to implement it, it's understood across the board, how can it not be simpler?
Yeah.
Right? And you actually can reduce the risk because, not to quote a colleague, but if you look at the different layers of security and you go through those and you're very comfortable and you have a different way of defining that, then how can it not be?
Yeah.
It's just the logic to it. And in reality, in the cloud, it's even probably safer because you limit other stuff that they don't have to worry about in an application layer.
Right. Within
the infrastructure, you're only worried about, in the reality, I guess, the application layer. That's all you really need to really look at.
Yeah, I think from an operations, a security operations perspective, just like from an IT operations perspective, the cloud in general and then containerization even specializing that even further creates this opportunity because you no longer have to. So what are the 4 basic things that keep re-emerging as the key components of a security infrastructure or security instrumentation, right? When we peel everything away, we come down to basically 4 things. We want to have visibility into networks. We want to have visibility into endpoints. We want to be able to get some threat intelligence from somewhere so that we can contextualize and enrich information. And we want to be able to sort of apply some sort of business sensitivity to it by way of applying asset and identity information or access information on top of that, right? So those are the 4 primary categories. So we say if we have understood over some time that those are important and that is what's required, so then we say, all right, so now what do I get out of the box? Whether you're using containerization, whether we're talking about containerization or whether we're talking about cloud implementations in general, now you have a whole bunch of that model already loaded in. When you initiate an instance in AWS, you know who initiated it, you know what its size is, and you can deploy using whatever AMI that you're using or whatever mechanism that you're using to deploy it, you already know that configuration. So you can instrument that at the endpoint level or at the networking level. You already know from an access identity perspective who's getting in there and who's instantiating it, and you can instrument it so that you know who's actually logging in or logging out, right? And from threat intelligence, now that you have this broader view of what's happening, you can apply it across your entire deployment selectively or in aggregate and be able to get that. So of course, and not to pitch product too much, is that's the people who are doing this successfully in breach investigation and response, that is exactly the kind of thing that they're leveraging. That is exactly the sort of methodology that's providing value because you want to be able to bundle that quickly. And that is the kind of thing when we talk about innovation, it allows you to basically leapfrog. I mean, think about it for a second. If you were to go to a traditional enterprise, even if it has 100 systems, 100 endpoints, and you said you wanted to implement today endpoint security at some level, network security, you want to integrate threat intelligence, and you want to bring in asset and identity information, and you want to keep it sort of near time. You want to keep it live, right? And you want to do that so things are not dead on arrival, so reports are not dead on arrival. Good luck. It takes, you know this, right? You guys have experience with this. It takes a long time to do these things. And so we have this out of the box now, so we can sort of go to the next level of being able to really focus on who the attacker is, what is our business, and what is our mission. So we can deliver it. Security is a service to the business. And I think that enables that, right?
Yeah, and my colleagues are kind enough not to plug their products too much, but I'll plug them. Splunk is doing some really incredible work around threat intelligence, and we see really, really good results. Trend Micro, I think you alluded to something earlier that kind of blew my mind when I first saw it, which was, okay, Patch Tuesday arrives, but you don't have to patch your Windows operating system. Our endpoint protection software knows the attack vector at the network level, blocks that, when you get around to patching, fine, then you remove the rule from the endpoint protection. I mean, these are brilliant. These are the kind of innovative things that is really arriving and thriving in the cloud era. And so I think we're seeing a disruption and change at a lot of levels. It's the business model changing, it's the technology stack changing, and I think the approach to security is a part of that big change as well. And hey, it's timely, right? Read the headlines. I mean, we need a new paradigm. We're in pretty bad shape. The house is on fire, I think, in terms of our traditional systems. And so it's not that the cloud is a panacea. You can still build insecure systems if you don't use the cloud in a smart way. There's no question. But at the same time that you're making the necessary changes to your business model, to your technical models, and so forth, you can build in security in a very deep way that is very natural, and I think will serve us all in very good stead for a long time.
So you raised the topic about what's happening in the news.
No comment.
Now he's gonna put us on the spot here.
And I guess your perspective on whatever you've heard in the news, what do you feel could have been done to be able to prevent? I'm talking about OPM.
Yeah. So for the mic, the news is there's a lot in the news. OPM, the word OPM was mentioned, and not the one that means other people's money. And the question for the panelists is, what do you think? What could be done differently? How can we avoid these kind of disasters in the future? Is that a fair summary of your statement, of your question? Okay.
I think one of the biggest things to recognize about any number of these breaches, when you listen to the folks with boots on the ground who are trying to respond to it, who are operating any number of these networks, whether it's in financial services or in government or wherever, right? The first thing that pops up is that they don't have visibility into what's going on in their environments. So they don't really know as to where their footprint is. They don't understand what the interactions are. The second thing that pops up invariably is they really don't know where all the assets are. And they really don't know what all the connection points are, right? So we'll sort of loop that in sort of the operational model of who's doing what. And then the third piece is that who's doing what in terms of users, right? Who are the users who have access to the information, and how are those users accessing that information so that they can build any sort of anomaly model on top of that thing, right? And so we can single out any given person. I personally have a really tough heartburn when we sort of joke about a particular compromise. And the reason for that is it's like shaming the victim. I don't know a single security analyst. I have a lot of peers in government and financial services and any number of different organizations. I was an incident responder myself for a while. These people work incredibly hard. The reason why they're not successful is because the adversary has to find one path. The reason why they're not successful is because the policies maybe don't match their funding models. So there is any number of constraints around that, but at the end of the day, when you peel all that away, it still boils down to the fact that analysts don't have the visibility that they require. As a result, they're not able to build the appropriate anomaly detection or response models, and then they're not able to respond in a timely fashion. We can pretty it up any which way we want, but that's the nut of it, right? And the other thing that's happening is when you go and talk to analysts, and many of you are leaders in your own businesses and in your operations in this room, when you look at your analysts, I bet you they spend 60 to 70% of their time being data gophers and not analysts. And that's a shame, right? Because we have this incredibly powerful human resource that can contextualize faster than a machine, that is intelligent, that works hard, that's committed, that's devoted. But what are they doing? They're going out filling ice buckets all day long so they can actually try to figure out what to do with it, rather than actually analyzing information that they can get, right? And so I think bringing it back to the cloud conversation is that what do you get from the cloud? You get that visibility, you get that transparency very, very quickly, and that's the opportunity to leapfrog what's going on in the environments, right? And so those are the key pieces. The breaches will continue. It's just a matter of how is it that we manage that, and let's stop shaming the victims here. That doesn't help anything.
No,
Great answer.
well, no,
Thank you.
No,
It's OPM.
Yeah. Well, no, I just tag on with a little bit. I think it comes back to, it's from the cloud perspective, it's what the shared responsibility model has to offer. It's in general, we have a bunch of agencies out there that are standing up their own data centers, multiple data centers, to that point that they are working tirelessly to accomplish it, but it's reinventing the wheel every time, everywhere, versus setting what we have here and saying, look, we're going to develop best of breed in 1, 2, multiple cloud environments, and we're going to start taking vendors, such as the 2 that are up here, that allow solutions architects to use them and really use those and vet and have solid solutions that they can put in place for them from the get-go. And so those administrators at that level, they have that confidence of saying, look, now internally I can focus on what it is, my business need, my drive. This is my application. This is what it needs to do. And I know, down the chain, that's taken care of. That's proven. That's vetted.
Yeah, the big power of this shared responsibility model is less responsibility overall.
Yeah.
Go deeper and do better job with the part that remains. And that's really a key part of the cloud message. Any final comments here? We're about out of time, so you can have the last word.
Well, thank you. So if you go to slide 246, please. Have no fear, right? You've heard it all, right? There are 2 types of companies in the world, those that have been hacked and those that don't know it. Right? Have no fear. Look, I can tell you, every one of us has been in organizations. They'll spend $500,000 on a product and not understand how to use it. 0 on training. They won't get people in there that help them get smart about how they leverage that product in that scenario. You can't have fear around it. Think of it as an opportunity. When you hear the stories about Amazon, and I go back, I give a couple, I'm sure you guys can give couples. Oh, we saved 78%, or we saved 40%, or we were able to eliminate this type of technology, or we were able to leverage this type of technology. Understand how to use it, understand how to implement it, and understand how to use that to your advantage. I guarantee you, somebody in this room will take it on the chin first. We're a security company. We know that. We cannot see everything every day. There's hundreds of thousands of exploits. We store 15 terabytes of information a day on threats in the world. There's no way you're not going to take it on the chin somehow. But don't be so unafraid that when it happens to get the visibility to it, it's not that it happened, it's how do you respond to it? And how do you shut it down? And leverage the technologies to your advantage that allow you to do that. Shared security model is a perfect example. People come to us all the time. Is it more secure in the cloud? 2 things about Amazon. 1, they eat their own crow, right? 2, you don't have to worry about half the things that they have to worry about. So why is that not easier for you to sleep a little bit better at night? Now you can focus that smart. But generally, when people hide it, they don't understand their technology, I guarantee you one thing, you're going to be making a call to somebody someday to say, I've got a problem. And I guarantee you, if you take the time to understand it, you also get in a scenario that you're going to sleep a little better at night, but more importantly, to go back to our theme, you're not going to let that stop your innovation. It's going to happen. But the other side of things is, if you leverage your technology right, you're going to see it quicker, and you're going to eliminate it, and as a result, you get to have more fun.
There you go. So take it on the chin, but don't let it knock you down.
Yep.
Hey, it's a bar fight, right? I used to say, in a bar fight, if you ever take your opponent and you knock him to the ground and let him stand back up, you deserve to get your butt kicked.
All right, well, on that peaceful note,
Let's go to the bar.
thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you at the reception.